The fluorescent lights of Boston Memorial Hospital cast harsh shadows across Linda Pearson's face as she made her way down the sterile corridor of the oncology ward. Her steps echoed against the linoleum floor, matching the anxious rhythm of her heart. Outside, the Massachusetts autumn had turned bitter early this year, with a November wind that cut through her wool coat and chilled her to the bone. But it wasn't just the weather making her shiver. 3 months. That's all the doctors had given Matthew. 3 months since the diagnosis of stage I-4 pancreatic cancer had blindsided them both, shattering the comfortable life they'd built over 23 years of marriage. Matthew Pearson, once vibrant, commanding, the successful investment banker whose laughter filled their Beacon Hill brownstone, now lay tethered to machines, his once broad frame hollowed by disease and chemotherapy. Linda clutched the canvas tote bag containing Matthew's favorite books, a fresh set of pajamas, and the lavender hand lotion she'd been massaging into his increasingly brittle skin. At 52, she hadn't expected to become a widow so soon. Their daughter, Sophia, was finishing her residency at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. They were supposed to have decades ahead to travel, to spoil grandchildren, to grow old together on that seaside property in Maine they'd been saving for. As Linda approached room 412, she heard voices, hushed, urgent. She slowed her pace, not wanting to interrupt if the doctor was with Matthew, but it wasn't Dr. Whitman's clinical tone she recognized. "You have to tell her, Matt." The voice belonged to Richard Donovan, Matthew's business partner and closest friend for over 20 years. "This isn't something you can take to your grave." Linda froze just outside the door, her hand suspended mid-air, reaching for the handle. It would destroy her. Matthew's voice was faint, a phantom of its former resonance. "What good would it do now? I'm dying, Rich. Let me go with some dignity." "Dignity?" Richard's voice cracked. "Is that what we're calling it? This isn't just about you and Linda anymore. There are other people involved, people who deserve—" "I made my choice." Matthew's words were punctuated by a wheeze. "I've lived with it for 15 years. I can die with it too." Linda's stomach clenched. 15 years. What had happened 15 years ago? Her mind raced back. Sophia was in high school then. Matthew had just made partner at the firm. They'd moved to the brownstone. It had been a good time, hadn't it? The investments weren't the only thing you were hiding. Richard's voice dropped even lower, but in the quiet hospital corridor, Linda could still make out every devastating word. "Caroline wasn't just your assistant, was she? And that accident—" "Jesus, Matt. I've kept your secrets because you were my friend, but this is too much." Caroline Miller. The name struck Linda like a physical blow. Matthew's young assistant who had died in a car accident 15 years ago. Linda remembered attending the funeral, remembered Matthew's uncharacteristic despondency in the months that followed. She'd attributed it to stress, to the natural response to losing someone from the office, so tragically. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Matthew's voice broke. "You have to believe that. It was supposed to be a simple diversion of funds, just until the market turned around. But then Caroline found out, and she threatened to go to the SEC. We argued that night. She was driving too fast." Linda's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. The tote bag slipped from her grasp, landing with a soft thud against the polished floor. "I didn't mean for her to die, Rich, but I couldn't stop it once it started. The cover-up, the accident report using client funds to hide the losses. One lie led to another and another. By the time I realized how deep I was, there was no way out. And now?" Richard's voice was heavy with resignation. "What happens to all of it when you're gone? The falsified records will surface eventually. The statute of limitations on financial fraud doesn't expire just because you do. They'll come after your estate, after Linda and Sophia. You'll protect them. It wasn't a question. You promised me." A long silence followed, broken only by the distant beep of medical equipment and the soft hum of the hospital's ventilation system. "I've done everything you've asked for 20 years, Richard finally said, "but this is the last time. I'm setting it right after you're gone, Matt. For Linda's sake, for mine." The sound of approaching footsteps from inside the room propelled Linda into action. She backed away quickly, ducking into a nearby family waiting area, her mind reeling. Her husband, her Matthew, had been involved in financial fraud, had somehow been responsible for Caroline Miller's death, had lied to her face every day for 15 years. Linda sank into a faded blue chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The steady tick of the wall clock seemed to mock her, counting down the seconds of a life suddenly revealed to be built on deception. Outside the window, the Boston skyline glittered against the night sky. lights from office buildings where people like Matthew made decisions that rippled outward, affecting countless lives. How had she not known? How had she missed the signs? She thought of their life together, the charity galas, the vacations, Sophia's expensive education, all potentially funded by stolen money. Blood money. As Richard emerged from Matthew's room and walked briskly toward the elevator, Linda shrank back, unwilling to be seen. She watched his familiar figure, the slight stoop of his shoulders, the premature grey at his temples, with new eyes. How complicit was he? What else was he hiding? When the elevator doors closed behind him, Linda gathered what remained of her composure and collected her dropped bag. Her hands shook as she smoothed her hair and wiped away the tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. Matthew was dying. Whatever he had done, whatever secrets he had kept, she had promised to be by his side until the end. But as she finally entered room 412 and saw her husband's gaunt face brighten at the sight of her, Linda knew that everything had changed. The confession she had overheard would not stay buried in that hospital corridor. One way or another, she would uncover the full truth about Caroline Miller, about the financial fraud, about the man she had thought she knew better than anyone else in the world. Matthew reached for her hand, his skin papery and cool against hers. "You're late," he said, his voice tender despite its weakness. I was starting to worry. Linda forced a smile as she sat beside him, taking his hand between both of hers. "Traffic," she lied, the first of what she suspected would be many lies between them in the days to come. "How are you feeling tonight?" As Matthew began to speak about his day, about the tests and the pain and the fleeting moments of clarity, Linda's mind was already elsewhere, calculating, planning, wondering where she would even begin to unravel 15 years of deception. In the reflection of the darkened hospital window, Linda caught a glimpse of herself, her face set with a determination she scarcely recognized. Matthew might be leaving this world, but his secrets wouldn't follow him. Not if she could help it. The morning after Linda overheard Matthew's confession, Boston awoke beneath a grey blanket of clouds that matched her mood. She sat at her kitchen island, surrounded by stacks of papers she'd pulled from Matthew's home office. During the pre-dawn hours when sleep had proven impossible, their brownstone felt cavernous without Matthew's presence, each creak and settle of the old building a reminder of her solitude. In the 23 years they'd lived here, Linda had never really examined Matthew's financial records. He handled the investments, the taxes, the retirement planning. She'd trusted him implicitly, focusing instead on her work as a curator at the Museum of Fine Arts and raising Sophia. That trust now felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. "Mom, you're up early." Sophia stood in the kitchen doorway, hair tousled from sleep, still wearing the oversized Harvard Medical School t-shirt she'd slept in since high school. She had flown in from Baltimore 3 days ago, taking emergency leave from her residency program to be with her father in what the doctors were now saying might be his final week. Linda quickly shuffled the papers into a more orderly pile. "Couldn't sleep," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Thought I'd get a head start on organizing some of Dad's things." Sophia poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, studying her mother with the clinical gaze she'd developed during medical school. "You look terrible. Did something happen at the hospital last night?" For a moment, Linda considered telling her daughter everything, the overheard confession, the financial crimes, Caroline Miller. But the protective instinct that had guided her mothering for 27 years prevailed. Until she knew exactly what they were facing, Sophia needed to focus on saying goodbye to her father. "Just the usual," Linda lied, hating the ease with which the deception came. "Your father was tired. We talked a little about the main house." The main house. Their dream retirement property on the coast. 3 acres of oceanfront land purchased 5 years ago, where they planned to build once Matthew retired. Would that land need to be sold to repay whatever funds he had stolen? Would it be seized as part of his estate? "I made some calls yesterday," Sophia said, sliding onto the stool beside Linda. "Dr. Larson from Hopkins knows a specialist at Mass General who's had some success with experimental treatments for late-stage pancreatic cancer. It's a long shot, but—" "Sweetheart," Linda reached for her daughter's hand. "Your father has made his decision. No more treatments. He wants quality of life now, not quantity." Sophia's eyes, so like Matthew's in shape and color, filled with tears. "It just feels like giving up." "I know." Linda squeezed her hand. "But sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to let go." The irony of her words wasn't lost on Linda. She had no intention of letting go, not of her quest for the truth, not of her determination to protect Sophia from whatever fallout might come from Matthew's actions. After Sophia left to shower and dress for their hospital visit, Linda returned to the papers spread before her. Bank statements, investment reports, tax returns, the mundane documentation of their financial life together revealed nothing obviously suspicious to her untrained eye. Whatever fraud Matthew had committed, he had covered his tracks well. She needed help, someone who could make sense of the numbers, someone who wasn't Richard Donovan. The thought of Matthew's business partner made Linda's stomach clench. He had been their friend, a fixture at holidays and birthday celebrations. He was Sophia's godfather, for heaven's sake, and all that time he had known what Matthew had done. Linda reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for, Elaine Parker. They had met 10 years ago through a museum fundraiser. Elaine, a forensic accountant whose sharp mind and sharper tongue had immediately endeared her to Linda. They'd maintained a casual friendship over the years, meeting occasionally for lunch or gallery openings. "Linda," Elaine answered on the third ring, her voice warm with surprise. "It's been ages. How are you holding up?" News of Matthew's diagnosis had spread quickly through their social circle. The initial flood of casseroles and sympathy cards had given way to the awkward distance that often accompanied prolonged illness. People uncertain what to say, how to help. "About as well as can be expected," Linda replied, the practiced response coming automatically. "Listen, Elaine, I need your professional expertise, discreetly. Could we meet today?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "This sounds serious." "It is." Linda's voice dropped to a near whisper, though Sophia was still upstairs. "I think Matthew's been involved in some financial irregularities, possibly for years." "Oh, Linda." Elaine's voice softened with compassion rather than judgment. "I'm free around 2. There's a coffee shop in Cambridge, away from your usual haunts. I'll text you the address." After ending the call, Linda began carefully sorting the financial documents into her leather portfolio. She needed to be at the hospital by noon for Matthew's pain management consultation, would need to manufacture an excuse to leave for her meeting with Elaine, would need to maintain the facade of the devoted wife while secretly investigating her husband's crimes. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, making each breath an effort. 15 years of deception. Had there been signs she'd missed, moments when the truth had nearly surfaced? Linda thought back to the period after Caroline Miller's death, Matthew's insomnia, his sudden aversion to driving, the increased drinking that had concerned her enough to suggest therapy. He'd attributed it all to work stress, to turning 40, to a midlife reassessment, and she had believed him because it had never occurred to her to do otherwise. The doorbell rang, startling Linda from her thoughts. Through the frosted glass panels of their front door, she could make out Richard Donovan's silhouette. For a moment she considered not answering, unwilling to face the man who had enabled Matthew's deception for so many years, but confronting Richard might be her fastest path to the truth. Linda smoothed her hair, tucked the financial documents into a kitchen drawer, and opened the door. Richard looked as though he hadn't slept, his silver hair uncombed, dark circles shadowing his eyes. "Linda," he said, his voice rough, "I stopped by the hospital this morning. When they said you hadn't arrived yet, I thought I'd—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely. "Come in," Linda said, stepping aside. "Sophia's upstairs getting ready. We were planning to head to the hospital around noon." Richard followed her into the kitchen, declining her automatic offer of coffee. He stood awkwardly by the island, hands shoved into the pockets of his overcoat, eyes darting around the room as if searching for something, or avoiding her gaze. "Matthew had a rough night," he said finally. "The nurse said they increased his pain medication." Linda nodded, studying the man who had been a fixture in their lives for 2 decades. The man who had stood beside Matthew at charity events and golf tournaments, who had advised them on investments, who had helped Sophia secure her first internship at a prestigious research hospital. "Why are you really here, Richard?" Linda asked, the directness of her question surprising them both. Richard stiffened, then seemed to deflate. He sank onto one of the kitchen stools, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "I wanted to make sure you're all right. These next few days, they're going to be difficult. Because my husband is dying or because of what might come after?" Richard's head snapped up, eyes widening behind his glasses. "What did Matthew tell you?" "Nothing," Linda said, the bitterness she'd been suppressing seeping into her voice. "Matthew has told me nothing, but I heard you both last night at the hospital." The blood drained from Richard's face. "Linda, Save it." Linda raised a hand to silence him. "I heard enough to know that my husband has been lying to me for 15 years. that he was involved with his assistant, that he's committed financial fraud, that he may be responsible for Caroline Miller's death. What I don't know is the full extent of your involvement." Richard looked physically ill, his complexion ashen. "It's complicated, Linda. It wasn't as black and white as it might have sounded." "Then explain it to me." Linda crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "Because right now I'm trying to figure out how to protect my daughter from whatever mess you and Matthew created." Before Richard could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced Sophia's approach. Richard shot Linda a panicked look. "We'll finish this conversation later," Linda said quietly, her tone making it clear this wasn't optional. "For now, not a word to Sophia." Richard nodded just as Sophia entered the kitchen, her face brightening at the sight of her godfather. "Uncle Rich, I didn't know you were coming over." As Sophia embraced Richard, Linda watched the performance of normalcy begin. Richard's too hearty laugh, Sophia's chatter about hospital schedules and treatment options, the practiced dance of people pretending everything was fine when nothing would ever be fine again. Linda gathered her purse and car keys, mentally rehearsing how she would behave at Matthew's bedside today. How she would hold his hand and stroke his forehead and not scream at him for destroying the foundation of their life together. How she would smile at the nurses and consult with the doctors and not fall apart as her world continued to crumble around her. And beneath it all, a steely determination was taking root. Matthew might have initiated this deception, but Linda would be the one to end it, whatever the cost. The Cambridge coffee shop Elaine had chosen was deliberately nondescript, the kind of place frequented by students and professors from the nearby universities, where two middle-aged women poring over financial documents wouldn't attract attention. Linda arrived 10 minutes early, selecting a corner table with her back to the wall, where she could see both the entrance and the other patrons. The paranoia that had begun creeping into her consciousness since overhearing Matthew's confession now colored every interaction, every decision. On her way from the hospital, she had checked her rearview mirror repeatedly, convinced she was being followed. The feeling of being watched prickled at the base of her neck as she waited for Elaine, though a quick survey of the coffee shop revealed only the usual afternoon crowd, students hunched over laptops, a pair of professors arguing quietly over what appeared to be manuscript edits. Elaine arrived precisely at 2, her trademark red blazer standing out among the muted tones of the academic crowd. She spotted Linda immediately, navigating between tables with the confident stride that had always impressed Linda. Elaine moved through the world as if she owned it, her petite frame belying her commanding presence. "You look like hell," Elaine said by way of greeting, sliding into the chair opposite Linda. Her bluntness was part of her charm. Elaine had never been one for social niceties. "Feel worse," Linda replied with a grim smile. "Thank you for meeting me." After ordering a triple espresso for Elaine, chamomile tea for Linda, they got down to business. Linda explained the overheard conversation between Matthew and Richard, then pushed the portfolio of financial documents across the table. "I don't even know what I'm looking for," she admitted. "But if Matthew was diverting funds or hiding losses, there must be evidence somewhere." Elaine opened the portfolio, her expression shifting from sympathetic friend to focused professional. She scanned several pages, occasionally making notes on a small pad, before looking up at Linda with narrowed eyes. "This is complex," she said. "Pearson and Donovan handles high-net-worth private clients, correct? And they manage their own investment fund as well?" Linda nodded. "The Beacon Hill Fund, it's their flagship offering. I'll need more than these personal records," Elaine said. "If Matthew was hiding something, it would be in the firm's books, not your joint tax returns. And even then," she trailed off, shaking her head, "financial fraud at this level is sophisticated. Without access to the firm's internal systems, it would be nearly impossible to trace. So what do I do?" Linda's voice caught, the frustration of the past 24 hours threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "Wait for the SEC to come knocking after Matthew dies. Watch them seize everything we've built. Subject Sophia to that kind of public scandal?" Elaine reached across the table, covering Linda's hand with her own. "No. We start with what we know and work outward. Tell me everything about Caroline Miller." Linda recounted what little she knew. Caroline had been Matthew's executive assistant, a bright young woman in her late 20s with a business degree from Wellesley. She'd worked for Matthew for about 2 years before the accident. Linda had met her a handful of times at company events, had sent flowers when Caroline's mother passed away, had even helped her select a gift for her boyfriend's birthday once when they'd run into each other at Neiman Marcus. The accident happened on Route 93, Linda continued, the details surfacing from memory. Late at night, they said she lost control of her car during a rainstorm, went off the road near Quincy. The firm held a memorial service. Matthew was devastated, the whole office was, but now, she swallowed hard. Now I wonder if his grief was guilt rather than genuine loss. Elaine was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen against her notepad. When exactly did this happen? Do you remember the date? Summer of 2010, Linda said. July, I think. Why? Financial fraud often follows patterns, Elaine explained. If Matthew was hiding losses or diverting funds, there might have been a triggering event. Market downturn, bad investment, personal financial crisis. The timeline matters. Linda thought back to that summer. The recession had hit the firm hard. Matthew was working constant overtime trying to reassure clients. But by 2010, I thought things were stabilizing. Let me do some digging, Elaine said. I have contacts who can look into the accident report without raising flags. And I can run some preliminary analyses on these documents. See if anything jumps out. Be careful, Linda warned, lowering her voice. If Richard has been covering for Matthew all these years, there's no telling who else might be involved. Elaine's smile was thin. Linda, I've spent my career following money trails left by people far more dangerous than investment bankers. Trust me. After Elaine left with the financial documents, Linda remained at the coffee shop, her tea long cold, mind racing with possibilities. If Matthew had been embezzling from clients, if he had somehow caused Caroline's death, either directly or indirectly, the repercussions would be devastating. Criminal charges, civil lawsuits, their assets frozen or seized. She pulled out her phone, hesitated, then typed Caroline Miller Boston Accident 2010 into the search bar. The results were sparse. A brief obituary in the Boston Globe, a memorial page created by friends that had been inactive for years. Caroline had been 29, a Wellesley graduate as Linda remembered, survived by her father and a younger sister. Linda stared at the grainy photograph accompanying the obituary. Caroline's smile was confident, her dark hair framing a face Linda had only vaguely remembered. Had Matthew loved her? Had their affair been ongoing when she died? Or had Caroline simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, discovering financial irregularities that Matthew couldn't allow to become public? A notification lit up Linda's phone. A text from Sophia. Where are you? Dad's asking for you. Guilt surged through Linda as she realized she'd been gone from the hospital for nearly 3 hours. She quickly gathered her things and headed for her car, the weight of her investigation settling around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The drive back to Boston Memorial took her past the financial district, where the gleaming tower housing Pearson and Donovan stood among the city's skyline. For 20 years she'd looked at that building with pride, her husband's name emblazoned at the entrance, his corner office visible from certain angles of the harbor. Now she wondered what secrets those walls contained, what evidence might exist in filing cabinets and computer servers. At the hospital, Linda found Matthew sleeping, his breathing labored despite the oxygen tubes in his nostrils. Sophia sat beside him, leafing through a medical journal, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Conference call ran long, Linda explained, the lie coming easily now. Has there been any change? Sophia shook her head. Dr. Whitman stopped by. How thinks... Her voice caught. He thinks it might be days now, not weeks. Linda sank into the chair on the opposite side of Matthew's bed, reaching for his limp hand. His skin was cool to the touch, the blue veins prominently visible beneath the surface. How was it possible to feel such a confusing mixture of love and anger, grief and betrayal? This man had been her partner for more than half her life, the father of her child, her confidant and lover and friend. The prospect of losing him still tore at her heart, even as his deception fueled a simmering rage. Why don't you go home and get some rest? Linda suggested to Sophia. I'll stay with him tonight. Are you sure? Sophia's relief was evident. She'd been splitting hospital duty with Linda since arriving from Baltimore, the constant vigilance wearing on her despite her medical training. Positive, Linda said, forcing a smile. Take a hot bath, order some real food. I've got this. After Sophia left, Linda settled in for the night shift. The beeping monitors and hushed hospital sounds, a now familiar backdrop to her vigil. She had brought her laptop, intending to continue her research into Caroline Miller, but found herself instead staring at Matthew's face. In sleep, the lines of pain that had become permanently etched around his mouth in recent weeks relaxed somewhat. He looked more like the man she had married, the ambitious young analyst whose intensity had both intimidated and attracted her when they'd met at a gallery opening in 1987. She had been 24, fresh out of graduate school and starting her curatorial career. He had been 26, already marked for success at the firm he would eventually co-own. What had happened to that man? When had the drive for success twisted into something darker? Had it been a single decision, a momentary lapse in judgment that spiraled out of control? Or had there always been this capacity for deception within him, hidden beneath the surface of the life they'd built together? "You're thinking too loud." Matthew's voice, weak but lucid, startled Linda from her reverie. His eyes, sunken now in their sockets, fixed on her face. "What's wrong?" For a wild moment Linda considered confronting him, demanding answers about Caroline, about the fraud, about the lies. But looking at his frail form in the hospital bed, the tubes and wires tethering him to machines that were prolonging what little life remained, she couldn't bring herself to do it. "Nothing," she said, squeezing his hand. "Just worried about you." Matthew's laugh was a dry rattle. "Little late for that, don't you think?" "Don't," Linda said sharply. "Don't make jokes about this." "Gallows humor," Matthew replied, his gaze drifting to the window where the Boston night skyline glittered. "It's all I have left." They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the soft hiss of the oxygen. Linda wondered if he was thinking about Caroline, about whatever financial schemes he'd orchestrated, about the web of lies he'd constructed around their life together. "I saw Richard today," she said finally, watching his face carefully. "He stopped by the house this morning." Matthew's expression remained neutral, though a slight tension appeared at the corners of his mouth. "How is he?" "Worried about you," Linda said. "About what happens after." "After I'm gone, you mean?" Matthew's directness about his impending death had been consistent since the diagnosis. No euphemisms, no false hope. Linda nodded. "He seems to think there might be complications." Matthew's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of complications?" "He didn't say," Linda lied, studying her husband's reaction. "But he seemed concerned about the firm, about how certain clients might react." A shadow crossed Matthew's face. There and gone so quickly, Linda might have missed it if she hadn't been watching so carefully. "Richard worries too much," he said dismissively. "The succession plan is in place. The firm will continue without me." "And what about us?" Linda pressed. "Sophia and me? Is there anything I should know, Matthew? Anything you want to tell me while you still can?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. For a moment, Linda thought he might confess, might unburden himself of the secrets he'd carried for 15 years. His eyes, once so confident and assured, now held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I've provided for you both," he said finally. "The life insurance, the investments, you'll be taken care of." It wasn't what Linda had been asking, and they both knew it. The opportunity for honesty slipped away as Matthew's eyelids grew heavy, the increased pain medication making it difficult for him to remain conscious for long periods. "Rest," Linda said, smoothing his thin hair back from his forehead. "I'll be here when you wake up." As Matthew drifted back to sleep, Linda opened her laptop, determined to use these quiet hours to continue her investigation. If Matthew wouldn't provide answers, she would find them herself, even if what she discovered destroyed every memory, every moment of happiness they had shared. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Elaine. "Found something? Call me tomorrow. Early." Linda stared at the message, her heart rate accelerating. Whatever Elaine had discovered, Linda knew instinctively it would change everything. Again. As she looked from her phone to her sleeping husband, Linda steeled herself for what was to come. There would be time for grief later. For now, she needed answers. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp November day that would normally have energized Linda. But after a night of fitful sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair, interrupted by nurses checking Matthew's vitals and adjusting his medication, she felt hollowed out, running on nothing but determination and 4 cups of weak hospital coffee. She'd left the hospital briefly at 6 a.m., using the excuse of going home to shower and change clothes. Instead, she'd driven directly to Elaine's brownstone in the South End, where her friend was already waiting, kitchen table covered with documents. "You look worse than yesterday," Elaine greeted her, ushering Linda inside. "Have you slept at all?" "Sleep is for people whose husbands haven't been committing fraud for 15 years, Linda replied, gratefully accepting the mug of strong coffee Elaine pressed into her hands. "What did you find?" Elaine's expression turned serious, as she led Linda to the dining table. "I called in some favors, had a contact pull the police report on Caroline Miller's accident." She pushed a folder across the table. "There are inconsistencies, Linda. Big ones." Linda opened the folder with trembling hands. The official accident report described a single-car incident on a rainy night. Caroline's BMW hydroplaning on Route 93, crashing into a guardrail before rolling down an embankment. Death had been instantaneous, the result of catastrophic head trauma. "What am I missing?" Linda asked, scanning the clinical language of the report. "Look at the toxicology results," Elaine said, pointing to a section near the back of the report. Caroline's blood alcohol level was 0.9, more than twice the legal limit. Linda frowned. "So she was driving drunk?" "According to the report, yes," Elaine agreed. "But I spoke with Caroline's sister last night, found her through social media. She was adamant that Caroline never drank, not even socially. Their father was an alcoholic, and Caroline had a strict personal policy against alcohol." "People hide things," Linda said quietly, thinking of Matthew. "Her sister might not have known everything about her life." "True," Elaine conceded. "But there's more. The accident occurred at 11:42 p.m. According to both the police report and witness statements, Caroline was alone in the car, but her sister told me Caroline had called her at 10:30 that night, saying she was heading to meet Matthew at the office for an urgent matter." Linda's coffee turned bitter in her mouth. "Matthew told me he was working late that night. I remember because we had planned to go to the Cape that weekend, and he called to say he might need to delay our departure because of some client emergency." "There's one more thing," Elaine said, hesitation evident in her voice. "My financial contact found something when he looked into Pearson and Donovan's public filings around that time. 3 weeks after Caroline's death, the firm disclosed a restatement of earnings for the previous quarter, basically admitting they had overstated profits. It wasn't a major scandal. The market was volatile post-recession, and lots of firms were making similar adjustments. But the timing is suspicious," Linda finished, the pieces beginning to align in her mind. "Caroline discovers Matthew has been cooking the books. She threatens to expose him. They argue, and somehow she ends up dead in what's made to look like a drunk driving accident." Speaking the scenario aloud made Linda physically ill. The Matthew she knew, the man who had held her through her father's death, who had patiently taught Sophia to ride a bike, who had supported Linda's career even when it meant attending gallery openings and fundraisers he found tedious. That man could not have been capable of such a thing. But then, that man had never existed. Not really. "We don't know exactly what happened," Elaine cautioned, "but there's enough here to warrant serious concern, Linda. If the police were to reopen this investigation—" "They won't," Linda interrupted, a certainty settling over her. "Not with Matthew dying, not after 15 years. But Richard knows, and whoever helped cover this up knows." "What are you going to do?" Elaine asked. Linda gathered the documents, her decision already made. "Confront Richard. Today. He owes me the truth before Matthew." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Be careful," Elaine warned. "If what you suspect is true, these men have gone to considerable lengths to hide it. Even now, with Matthew terminal—" "I'm not afraid of Richard," Linda said, rising from the table, "and I need answers before it's too late." The drive to Pearson and Donovan's offices in the financial district took Linda through familiar streets that now seemed alien, as if she was seeing Boston through a stranger's eyes. The security guard in the lobby greeted her by name. She had visited Matthew here countless times over the years, attended holiday parties and retirement celebrations on the top floor with its sweeping views of the harbor. "Mrs. Pearson," he said, his expression softening with sympathy. "I'm so sorry about Mr. Pearson. How is he doing?" "Fighting," Linda replied automatically, the social script for terminal illness now second nature. "Is Richard in today?" "Mr. Donovan is in a meeting, but I'm sure he'll want to see you." The guard made a quick call, then directed her to the express elevator. 32nd floor, his assistant will meet you." As the elevator ascended, Linda mentally rehearsed what she would say to Richard. The evidence Elaine had uncovered wasn't conclusive, but it painted a damning picture. Financial irregularities, Caroline's suspicious death, the convenient timing of it all. If Richard had been complicit in a cover-up all these years, what would he do when confronted? Richard's assistant, a young man whose name Linda couldn't recall, greeted her with the same pitying expression she'd grown to resent. "Mrs. Pearson, Mr. Donovan just wrapped up his meeting. He's waiting for you." Richard stood as she entered his corner office, his face registering surprise at her unannounced visit. "Linda, is it Matthew?" Has something— Matthew is the same, she interrupted, closing the door firmly behind her. I'm here to talk to you, Richard, about Caroline Miller. The color drained from Richard's face as he sank back into his chair. Linda, I don't think— I know about the accident, she continued, placing Elaine's folder on his desk. I know about the restatement of earnings 3 weeks after her death. I know she called her sister saying she was meeting Matthew at the office the night she died. What I don't know is exactly what role you played in all of this. Richard stared at the folder as if it might bite him. You've been investigating. Did you think I wouldn't? Linda remained standing, unwilling to cede even the small advantage of height. Matthew is dying, Richard. Whatever consequences he might have faced, he'll escape them now. But Sophia and I will be left to deal with the fallout. There won't be any fallout, Richard insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. The statute of limitations on financial reporting violations is 5 years. Whatever accounting irregularities existed back then, they can't be prosecuted now. And Caroline, Linda pressed, is there a statute of limitations on her death? Richard flinched. That was an accident, Linda. A tragic accident. Was it? Linda opened the folder, sliding the toxicology report across the desk. Caroline's sister says she never drank, not a drop. Yet somehow her blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal limit. How do you explain that? I can't. Richard removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose, a gesture Linda had seen countless times at dinner parties and family gatherings. How strange to watch these familiar mannerisms now, knowing they belonged to a man she had never truly known. I wasn't there that night. But you know what happened, Linda insisted. You've been covering for Matthew all these years. Did he kill her, Richard? Did my husband kill that young woman? No. Richard's response was immediate and forceful. God, no. Matthew would never— He broke off, shaking his head. You need to understand the context, Linda. The firm was in trouble, serious trouble. The recession had hit our portfolio hard, and Matthew had made some high-risk investments without proper authorization. He was trying to save the firm, to protect our clients' money, but it backfired spectacularly. And Caroline found out, Linda said, the narrative becoming clearer. Richard nodded reluctantly. She was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. She noticed discrepancies in the reports, started asking questions. Matthew tried to convince her that it was just temporary, that he would fix it, but Caroline threatened to go to the SEC. So he met her that night. To reason with her, Richard emphasized, to explain that he was working on a solution, that exposing the situation would only hurt our clients more. They argued at the office. Matthew said she was upset when she left, but very much alive. The accident happened later. Linda studied Richard's face, searching for any sign of deception. Then why the cover-up? Why alter the toxicology report? Richard's shoulders sagged with the weight of 15 years of secrecy. When the police called Matthew about the accident, he panicked. Caroline had died after leaving a heated argument with him about financial fraud. How would that look? He called me and I called someone who could help, a former client with connections in law enforcement. You falsified evidence, Linda said flatly. You made it look like she was driving drunk to divert suspicion from Matthew. The manipulation of the toxicology report wasn't my idea, Richard protested weakly. But yes, I helped cover up the circumstances. We were protecting the firm, Linda. Hundreds of people worked for us. Thousands of clients had entrusted their life savings to us. If the truth had come out about the financial mismanagement, coupled with Caroline's death. So you just erased her, Linda said, disgust rising in her throat. Made her the villain in her own death. Do you have any idea what that did to her family? Her sister told Elaine they've spent 15 years believing Caroline broke her sobriety the night she died, that she was responsible for her own death. Richard had the decency to look ashamed. It was wrong, all of it was wrong. But once it started, there was no going back. The altered police report, the financial cover-up, one lie led to another. And the money, Linda asked. Matthew mentioned diverting client funds. We paid it all back, Richard said quickly. Every penny with interest. It took years, and we had to make some creative accounting decisions. But no client lost money in the end. Linda laughed bitterly. How noble. And Caroline Miller. How do you repay her? Richard had no answer for that. Linda gathered the documents, her mind racing. The truth was both worse and better than she had feared. Matthew hadn't killed Caroline directly, but his actions and the subsequent cover-up had irreparably damaged her memory, her family's understanding of her death. What happens now? Richard asked, his voice small. Are you going to the police? Linda considered the question. What would justice look like in this situation? Matthew was dying, beyond the reach of legal consequences. The financial crimes were past the statute of limitations. Only the falsified police report might still be actionable, but proving it after 15 years would be nearly impossible. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly, "but I'm going to start by telling Caroline's family the truth. They deserve that much at least." Richard nodded slowly. "And afterward, the firm." "I don't care about the firm," Linda cut him off. "I care about my daughter and what this will do to her image of her father. I care about making what restitution we can to Caroline's family." "I understand," Richard said, though Linda doubted he truly did. "Whatever you decide, I won't fight it. I'm tired of living with this, Linda. Tired of the lies." As Linda turned to leave, a final question occurred to her. Was Matthew having an affair with her? With Caroline? Richard hesitated, then shook his head. "No, not in the way you're thinking. Matthew was fond of her, certainly. She reminded him of you, actually. Same intensity, same intelligence, but there was no physical relationship. The guilt he felt after her death, it was about the argument, about his role in covering up the truth, not about an affair." Linda wasn't sure if this revelation made things better or worse. It removed one layer of betrayal, only to reinforce another. Matthew had respected Caroline enough to see parallels with his wife, yet had still participated in destroying her reputation after death. The elevator ride to the lobby gave Linda time to process everything she'd learned. By the time she reached her car, a strange calm had settled over her. The truth, however ugly, was preferable to the uncertainty that had been consuming her. She checked her phone and found 3 missed calls from the hospital. Her heart stuttering, Linda immediately returned the call. "Mrs. Pearson," Dr. Whitman's grave voice confirmed her fears. "You need to come to the hospital right away. Matthew's condition has deteriorated significantly in the last hour." Linda drove through Boston's midday traffic with mechanical precision, her mind strangely clear despite the emotional turmoil. She had wanted answers, and now she had them. Incomplete, perhaps, but enough to understand the shape of Matthew's deception. The question remained, what would she do with this knowledge? At the hospital, she found Sophia already in Matthew's room, her face streaked with tears as she held her father's hand. Matthew's breathing had become shallow and labored, his skin taking on the waxy pallor that Linda recognized from her father's final hours. "The doctor says it could be today," Sophia said as Linda entered, her voice breaking. "His organs are shutting down." Linda moved to the opposite side of the bed, taking Matthew's other hand. Despite everything, her heart constricted at the sight of him. This man she had loved for half her life, now slipping away. To her surprise, Matthew's eyes fluttered open at her touch. "Linda," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're here." "I'm here," she confirmed, squeezing his hand gently. "Sophia," Matthew said, turning his head slightly toward their daughter, "could you give us a minute? Need to talk to your mother." Sophia looked uncertain. "Dad, the doctor said—" "Please," Matthew insisted with what little strength he had left. "Just a minute." After Sophia reluctantly stepped outside, Matthew turned his gaze back to Linda. His eyes, once sharp and perceptive, now seemed clouded with pain and medication, but there was a clarity in them that had been absent in recent days. "You know," he said simply, not a question. Linda nodded. "About Caroline. About the financial fraud." "Yes." Matthew closed his eyes briefly, a tear escaping down his sunken cheek. "I never meant for any of it to happen. The market crashed. I made risky investments, trying to save everything we'd built. When it all went wrong, I couldn't admit failure." "So you lied," Linda said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning within her. "You falsified reports. And when Caroline threatened to expose you—" "I didn't kill her," Matthew interrupted, his breath catching. "I swear to you. We argued. She left angry. The accident was real." "But you covered it up," Linda pressed. "Made it look like she was drunk. Destroyed her reputation to save yourself." Matthew's grip on her hand tightened fractionally. "Unforgivable," he whispered. "I know. Been paying for it. Every day since." Linda thought of all the nights Matthew had woken in a cold sweat over the years, the times he'd withdrawn into himself, the increasing donations to addiction treatment centers that she had attributed to ordinary philanthropy. Had it all been guilt? Penance for what he'd done? "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, the question that had been burning inside her since that moment in the hospital corridor. "All these years, Matthew. You let me believe in a life that wasn't real." "It was real," Matthew insisted, each word clearly requiring enormous effort. My love for you, for Sophia, that was always real, the only real thing in my life. Linda wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at him for the deception, for the way he had compromised his integrity and hers by extension. But looking at him now, reduced to this husk of the vibrant man she had married, she found the anger giving way to an overwhelming sadness. I need you to know, Matthew continued, his voice fading, Richard wasn't responsible. I dragged him into it, threatened him with exposure too. Don't blame him. Linda wasn't ready to absolve Richard, but she nodded, unwilling to argue with a dying man. What do you want me to do, Matthew? About Caroline's family, about the truth? Matthew's eyes, suddenly clear, locked with hers. Tell them, he said firmly, all of it. They deserve the truth. Use the insurance money. Set up a scholarship in her name. Make something good come from this. The simplicity of his request, this deathbed attempt at redemption, brought fresh tears to Linda's eyes. It wouldn't undo the damage, wouldn't bring Caroline back, or erase 15 years of deception, but it was something. And Sophia? Linda asked. What do I tell our daughter about her father? Matthew's face crumpled with grief. The truth. But if you can, help her remember the good too. I was more than my worst mistakes. Linda studied the face of her husband, the lines etched by pain and guilt, the grey hair she had watched turn from black over decades of shared life. Despite everything, she couldn't deny the truth of his words. He had been more than this terrible secret. He had been a loving father, a supportive husband, a man who had made one catastrophic error in judgment and spent the rest of his life trying to outrun its consequences. I'll try, she promised, not certain if she could fulfill it, but knowing that Sophia deserved the chance to form her own judgment. Matthew seemed to relax slightly, his breathing becoming more labored but less frantic. I'm sorry, he whispered. So sorry. I know, Linda said, and she did. Whatever anger and betrayal she felt, and there was plenty, she recognized the genuine remorse in his fading eyes. Should I get Sophia now? He asked, his voice barely audible. Linda nodded, rising to call their daughter back into the room. As Sophia rushed to her father's side, Linda stood back slightly, giving them space for their final moments together. She watched as Sophia held Matthew's hand, as she told him it was okay to let go, that she and Linda would be all right. Matthew's eyes sought Linda's over their daughter's bowed head. In that last lingering gaze was a lifetime of shared history, the joyful moments and the mundane, the triumph of Sophia's birth, and the quiet companionship of Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper, and beneath it all, the unspoken acknowledgement of his failings, his weakness, his humanity. Linda held his gaze steadily, offering neither absolution nor condemnation, only presence, only witness. It was, she realized, all anyone could truly offer in the end. When Matthew took his final breath 20 minutes later, it was with his family beside him, his secrets revealed but his dignity somehow still intact. 3 months after Matthew's funeral, Linda stood on the Wellesley College campus, watching as Caroline Miller's father and sister unveiled a plaque dedicating the new Caroline Miller Memorial Scholarship for Ethics in Business. The winter snow had given way to early spring, crocuses pushing through the thawing ground around the business school building. The process of truth-telling had been painful but necessary. Linda had met with Caroline's family privately before approaching the authorities, explaining everything she had discovered. Their initial shock and anger had gradually transformed into a cautious gratitude for the closure, if not forgiveness for those involved. The falsified police report had indeed been too old, the evidence too circumstantial for criminal charges. But with Richard's cooperation and a substantial donation from Matthew's life insurance policy, they had established the scholarship in Caroline's name, a small but meaningful recognition of the young woman whose potential had been cut short, whose memory had been tarnished by the men desperate to protect themselves. Sophia stood beside Linda at the ceremony, her expression solemn. Learning the truth about her father had been devastating, but over time, she had begun to speak of him with a more nuanced understanding, acknowledging his grave mistakes while still honoring the father who had loved her unreservedly. Do you think he would approve? Sophia asked quietly, as they watched Caroline's sister speak about the scholarship's mission to promote ethical business practices. Linda considered the question carefully. I think he would see it as necessary, she answered finally, as the right thing to do even if it came too late. After the ceremony, As they walked back to their car across the beautiful campus that Caroline had once called home, Linda felt a subtle shift within herself. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of acceptance. The truth had not been the ending she had feared, nor the catharsis she had hoped for. It had simply been the truth, complicated, painful, but ultimately freeing. The confession she had overheard that night in the hospital corridor had shattered her understanding of her marriage, of the man she had loved. But from those fragments, she and Sophia were constructing something new, a life based not on comfortable illusions, but on the harder, cleaner foundation of truth. As they drove away from Wellesley, Linda glanced at her daughter, Matthew's eyes in her face, his determination in the set of her jaw. Some legacies couldn't be erased by revelation. Some bonds couldn't be severed by betrayal. Whatever else Matthew had been, whatever lies he had told, his love for them had been real. And in the end, that truth coexisted with all the others. "What now?" Sophia asked as they merged onto the highway back toward Boston, where their lives, altered but ongoing, awaited them. Linda thought of the brownstone they had decided to keep, of the museum where she had returned to work part-time, of the grief support group she had joined that was slowly helping her navigate the complex terrain of mourning a man whose memory was both beloved and tarnished. "Now we live," she said simply, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "One day at a time." As the Boston skyline appeared on the horizon, Linda felt the weight of Matthew's secrets lifting slightly. The confession she would never forget had changed everything, but it had not defined her. That power at least remained her own.